we have here three of the world's leading artists in different fields. And beginning on my immediate right is Erica Jong. Erica is a legend, I think that's fair to say. Fear of Flying, her first and most famous novel, which was published in 1973, has sold over 27 million copies and been translated into 40 languages. And in the 4 decades since, she's published over 25 books in 43 languages. So there's 3 that Fear of Flying is not in, but something else that you have is in.
I don't
Interesting,
know.
wow, it's a little factoid, okay. Including 9 works of fiction, as well as a number of nonfiction works. And she's also one of the most important poets of her generation and has 7 published volumes of verse. She's won many awards for poetry and fiction all over the world, including the Fernanda Pivano Award in Italy, the Sigmund Freud Award in Italy, the Deauville Award in France, and the United Nations Award for Excellence in Literature. Her new novel, Fear of Dying, a sequel to Fear of Flying, is available outside. And Erica is also one of the nation's foremost feminist leaders and thinkers. And as you'll see, she's also very shy about her thoughts, particularly about Donald Trump. So hopefully you can all help me to get her to overcome that and be a little bit more outspoken. To Erica's right is Alexei Ratmansky. Alexei is perhaps the world's leading contemporary choreographer. He's too modest to say that, but he's in the world of ballet, he's a real rock star. He was born in St. Petersburg, trained at the Bolshoi Ballet School in Moscow as a dancer. His performing career included positions as a principal dancer with the Ukrainian National Ballet, the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, and the Royal Danish Ballet. And he's choreographed ballets for the Mariinsky, the Royal Danish Ballet, the Royal Swedish Ballet, the Dutch National Ballet, the New York City Ballet, the San Francisco Ballet, the Australian Ballet, the Kiev Ballet, and the State Ballet of Georgia. In 2004, Alexei was named the artistic director of the Bolshoi. And under his direction, the Bolshoi was named Best Foreign Company in 2005 and 2007 by the Critics' Circle in London. And he received a Critics' Circle National Dance Award for his choreography of The Bright Stream in 2006. In 2009, Alexei choreographed for the Metropolitan Opera's production of Aida, and then he joined the American Ballet Theater, where he is the artist in residence. For the American Ballet Theater, he's choreographed a number of productions, including 7 sonatas, The Waltz Masquerade, The Nutcracker, Firebird and Symphony No. 9, Serenade after Plato's Symposium, and most recently, Whipped Cream. He is currently working on a new version of Harlequinade for the spring. And Alexei is also a MacArthur Foundation Fellow, which is colloquially known as the Genius Award. And his latest ballet also premieres tomorrow, so we're very grateful that he took time out to come here to speak, and he's going to go right. We're going to send him right back afterwards, but we're very, very grateful, so thank you. And then to Alexei's right is John Curran, who is one of the great artists working today. From his biography, John Curran's ambitious paintings seduce, repel, surprise, and puzzle. His masterful technique is achieved through the scrutiny and emulation of the compositional devices, graphic rhythms, and refined surfaces of 16th and 17th century Northern European painting, while his eroticized subjects exist at odds with the popular dialogue and politics of contemporary art, with inspirations as diverse as old master portraits, pin-ups, pornography, and B-movies. Curran paints ideational yet challengingly perverse images of women, from lusty nymphs and dour matrons to more ethereal feminine prototypes. We're going to get Erica to comment on that in a minute. Consistent throughout his oeuvre is his search for the point at which the beautiful and the grotesque are held in perfect balance. So John was born in Boulder, Colorado. He has a BFA from Carnegie Mellon and an MFA from Yale. And his work is represented in many, many, many museum collections worldwide, including MoMA, the Whitney Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, the Pompidou, the Tate, the Walker, the Minneapolis the Walker and the Art Institute of Chicago. And he's also a member of our editorial board and is interested in a lot of things besides painting. But in any event, so thank you all for being here. So I will start with an easy or maybe a very difficult question. So this is going to be for all of you, but I'll start with you, Erica. Erica, what made you want to become a writer?
I really have no idea. I started out as a painter, grew up in a family of painters, and found the competition dreadful. So I sort of began writing, but I always wrote and painted, both at the same time. I don't know where the drive to write comes from. If you think about writing as a profession, it's a hopeless profession. If you knew how hard it was, you'd never write a line. And getting harder, for that matter. But you have this need to tell stories. And I truly don't know where that comes from. It's a drive. It's a calling more than a profession.
Are you driven more by fiction or nonfiction or poetry, or is it equal
Poetry
opportunity?
is absolute bliss. You write a poem and skip around the house. A novel is terribly hard. The beginning is hard, the ending is hard, and there's a brief moment in the middle when you're in bliss. But it's a difficult endeavor.
And Alexei, how did you become a dancer and then a choreographer?
Well, that happened very early in my life. Like with any child who likes moving around, just listening to the music and dancing in the apartment and entertaining my parents' guests who would suggest to my parents that they should bring me to the ballet school. And in Soviet Union, in Russia at that time, being a dancer meant you go on tour, you have a good salary, and you have good pension, and it's a respectable profession. So that's how it happened.
And then how did you become a choreographer?
Well, that's a different matter. I think when I started to like ballet, because I started to succeed in it, I was put in a class of like the most promising children, and there I realized I can never be as good as the leaders in the class, because to be a ballet dancer, you need a certain type of body, and you need a physical extension. You need to be able to point your feet and to jump high and to have a coordination. And it's very tough schooling in Russia still. That's probably why they produce so many great dancers. So there are certain standards that you got to get to. And from the age 10, when we started in the ballet school, we were told what's your shortcomings. Like you're told your legs are not long enough, or you have not a long enough neck, or your jump is not great. So we start working on these shortcomings. And at some point, I just realized that yes, I can do my best, but still I won't be able to get there where I wanted to. So I was looking around and thought composing dances, creating them would actually be interesting for me. So I made this decision and started to work towards it.
And John, did you always want to be a painter?
I think I wasn't aware of that as a profession, as really even a calling until I was always good at I got complimented a lot. When my family moved from California to Connecticut when I was 10, I immediately started getting beaten up and bullies at school, and I noticed that when they found out I could draw, it got them off my back, and it sort of helped me become popular. And then I met my violin teacher's husband. Was a wonderful painter from Odessa, and it was when I went to. He had a little studio in the attic. My mom had me painting with him on weekends when I was like 14, 15, for a couple of years, and that's where I saw that. What an oil painting was, and this could happen. That it's not just El Greco in the museum, because I did see the El Greco at the Met, and that was my first real experience of being knocked over by a painting. But I think I thought art at that point was, you know, Michael Heiser driving through the desert, and which it was, but I mean, I kind of thought it had completely left behind any kind of painting, which is partly true. And it was actually through Lev Meshberg, my Russian teacher, that I could imagine it being in my life in a way that wasn't, you know, because before that I think I thought I wanted to be like an album cover, you know, illustrator, or I briefly got interested in like designing cars or designing dashboards, being an industrial engineer, or something like that. But it was really through Lev that I saw that art could exist, you know, that it never died.
So it's interesting you bring that up. So because I've run into you at the Met, wandering around looking at paintings, and you're obviously very steeped in art history. Where do you see though figurative painting right now? Because
well, Erica was saying that her family had the misfortune of being figurative artists during the heyday of abstract expressionism, and I was lucky that there was a vacuum, you know, kind of right when I turned 30, there was like a vacuum of not really a vacuum. The neo-expressionists of the 80s, Schnabel and Sally and the Germans had opened a large space to exist, but it was in such ill repute that it was very easy to be somebody, to be different. You know, half of becoming an artist is distinguishing yourself, making yourself something
Right.
different, and simply doing the most typical painting one could imagine, a covered bridge over a babbling brook, you know, sort of could set you apart. I didn't ever do that painting, but you know what I mean, like so. I was fortunate to just have everyone not noticing how this huge inheritance, and you know, people would go to movies in droves. People want to look at other people and want to look at pictures, but in the art world, in the fine art world, there was a kind of a Savonarola like you know, just shame over graven images or something.
Why do you think figurative painting came back when it did? Because my grandfather, who was a wonderful portrait painter, used to say, our profession was killed by photography, as if that was a final thing. And yet people are interested in other human beings and are fascinated with the images. So that's sort of interesting that it did come back in a different way.
Well, I think interestingly, I think abstraction is it's not just the picture of a person or the picture of a thing. It's this kind of privileged position of being on the wall. That the wall is a spiritual realm of dreaming and of that just simply by being on the wall rather than in the middle of the room, it's the dream world, and it's always around you. And I think people just woke up to the joy of these things that are not really things. They're pictures on the wall. They're physically flat things on the wall, but they literally and figuratively open up the space and open up your consciousness. So I think that has more to do with it. A kind of the shame of pleasure, of visual pleasure, kind of falling away. People just got sick of they don't believe the religion anymore. So,
Alexei, you just revived a work that at its time was not really appreciated, Whipped Cream, and I'm curious what drew you to that, and why did you feel like that was interesting for right now?
I just wanted to follow up with, there's a similar process in ballet, I think. The shift happened from the abstract ballets towards narrative a couple of years ago, I think. And for a long time, narrative story ballets were considered like dated, second rate, and now I think there is a big interest towards it, and all over.
Well, it's an interesting question also because we have a figurative painter, a choreographer, and a poet, which are all sort of very high art, but are not, seem like they were going kind of the way of the buggy whip and now are having a revival. Do you
Right.
Do you think there's anything that's driving that, or is it just sort of the natural arc of back and forth in the arts?
It's probably a wave that brings a certain style back to fashion or not. But concerning Whipped Cream, this is a ballet by Richard Strauss, written in 1922 in Vienna, which hasn't been revived for many, many years. And we're always looking for new titles. The ballet repertoire is very narrow. You can't compare it to opera or to drama, let alone literature and all that. Our canon, classical canon, is just like 15 titles. That's it. The ballets that survived from 19th century.
Wow.
Probably because there is no really a system of writing it down. It was taught by the dancers or choreographers. So Whipped Cream has a great score, and I was praying that no one uses it before me since I discovered it in 1992 or 93. The story is almost non-existent, but it opens the amazing opportunities for, a lot of good theatrical scenes, for a lot of dancing. There is a long dream section, or rather nightmarish section. There are suites that we've seen in Nutcracker and other ballets, but it also has this little sinister, layer. So I was really hoping that it will work, and since we realized that Mark Ryden is the pop surrealist artist, is interested to collaborate on that. We thought it might work well, which it did.
It did, for sure. And Erica, you actually just made the decision to revisit your own work after a long period of time. What drove you to do that?
What, fear of dying?
Yeah.
Oh, God. They had been after me to write a sequel to Fear of Flying, which was really impossible, because Fear of Flying is a novel about a young woman dealing with her life. And Fear of Dying, I bring this young woman back as a friend of the main character, a kind of Jiminy Cricket. So that, I couldn't bring back Fear of Flying. Fear of Flying is a piece that was written in the 70s, and the world is different. So I had to find another way of revisiting that material in a totally, totally different way. Writing a sequel is a kind of nightmare, so it's not a true sequel.
Right. Well, it's interesting. So one thing I was thinking about is John, as a painter, it's sort of you and the canvas, right? And then writers have an editor, and half the writers I know either love their editor or hate their editor, but there's sort of a...
Oh, it's such a lonely profession.
Writing.
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, you're by yourself all the time, doubting yourself. I don't know if it's that way for a painter.
You make a lot of different, see, your editor in a way is people who buy your paintings, because there's a lot. I imagine if you're working on a novel, it's years, and you don't know, you're making this gigantic work of art, and paintings are just like little chapters,
Right.
So I think you get, and I'd be lying to say I don't pay attention to what people like and what people don't like, but I pay attention more to what my wife likes and what she doesn't like, or what. But I don't think it's lonely. I mean, I like being alone too.
And Alexei, you have sort of the opposite, which is you're in a collaborative. Does that drive you crazy being in a collaborative profession, or is it?
It's very, very different, because
Yeah.
choreographer can't even produce anything by himself.
Right.
Until you meet the dancers in the studio and teach them the material, nothing exists. So you can only speak through the voices or other bodies of other people. And then, of course, there is an orchestra, and there is a lighting design, there are costumes and sets. So it's all, you need to go through many doors until you reach the public.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find this exhilarating, frustrating, both?
It's both, but in a way, you can always say, oh, the dancers were not so good, you know. I did brilliant.
Right.
If something doesn't work.
Right.
And on the other hand, people can say, oh, the choreography is so-so, but the dancing is so brilliant. Right. And they bring up your work, you know, they help you. So what I find the most inspiring is to, you know, to find real contact, not only professional, but also human in the studio. So it's real collaboration. And it could be even more exciting and interesting than the premiere itself or the performance itself, because you have this intimate contact with them. You tell them what to do, and you shape, you know, their movements, and you give them images that they could waken up their imagination and stuff. It's wonderful, wonderful process.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing we're going to talk about in a little bit with Gary is artificial intelligence, and you know, that's a big topic of mine now, and what a lot of people who are thinking about it keep saying is that, well, creativity is sort of the last bastion of humanity. They'll be able to figure out, you know, machines, depending upon your time frame, will eventually do everything. But you know, now they're saying, you know, a computer eventually will be able, maybe even right now, will be able to write a sonnet like Shakespeare. But the question is, could they be Shakespeare? And I'm curious whether you guys, you know, how you have a view on that, whether there's something that's specifically goes to the human spirit about creativity, or is this something that is, you know, could actually be produced by a machine? I mean, John, maybe start with you, because obviously from a technique standpoint, they're getting very close, but the composition is something that's different.
I mean, the question is, I mean, could you make something that looked, what is it called? What's this, where if you can't figure out whether it's a human or a machine you're talking to, that's artificial intelligence? Well, there's some test.
Right.
Anyway, it seems to me that if a machine can't die and if a machine's not mortal, or rather that mortality is, and the consciousness, even when you're young, of mortality is kind of the most important aspect of any creation, and ultimately the most important incentive, and so is you know, fear of dying, and fear of oblivion, and so whether or not a machine could make this, I think that it's not really creative, you know, because it can't ever die. Therefore, what it's doing is not creation. I mean, that's maybe a facile, but you know, but it's
It's beautiful, really. I mean, that's the point. You can feed a computer with existing models of stories and poems, but can that computer come up with something that never existed before, driven by the knowledge of mortality?
well,
And I think it's unlikely.
But you're speaking of something where it's not a computer aided. This is where the computer has some consciousness or some ability to feed itself stimuli, but again, I'm not particularly religious, but if God in any form is not involved, and if dying is not involved, and really if life is not involved, then you have a sort of beautiful car, or
Right.
like, which is art, I guess. I mean, that's a bad
Is it
example.
art? I mean, this is a whole separate issue, which is, you know, there's such a big crossover now. But one of the critiques of the art world is it's become so commercial, and there's sort of, where is the line drawn? But and everything is, you know. Do you think we're living through a time that is less substantive, or do you think that the art of our times is going to, with yourself excluded, going to transcend what's going on?
Oh God,
Or are we all going to be on Instagram?
I
Is that
I
the
just
art
think
of our
things
time?
are things are so, especially the phones and the politics and the phones I have no I feel smaller and smaller and smaller personally, and less important. You know what I mean? Like less the romantic idea of my ideas means something. You know, like the artist that's going to change the world with his pen. That just seems very unlikely. You know, and
Do you think? Do you think? This is for all of you. I mean, we're living through a very political time, right? Everyone's very Trump obsessed. There's a lot going on, and you know, there's very little truly purely political art that lasts. There's generally something that has to do with the human experience. And I mean, do you think that our art right now is too political, or do you think that that's what artists should be looking at?
You're asking me?
I'm asking any of you.
I don't know. I think that it's hard for political art to transcend its moment. And in the novel I'm writing, Mr. Dumpf keeps invading, and I want to get him out because I think that it's very fickle, and I don't want him there. It dooms the piece to be too much of the time. And that's the struggle I'm in right now. I mean, there is political art that does work, that goes beyond, but usually it's created out of fables that mirror the time we're in, but are not specifically
Right.
visions.
Trump will be the bell bottoms of the art of our time. You know?
Right.
So.
He's not worthy, really, even of satire. He satirizes himself.
Yes.
Well, he did save Saturday Night Live, I think. So. But,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's just, useless trash.
Alexei, if you, just going back to the artificial intelligence, I mean, if you could have robots that could do your choreography precisely the way you want it, would you do it?
I think it could be very, very interesting. I wonder whether we will be able to say which ballet is choreographed by a human or well, we definitely will be able to say if robots are dancing, but if it's choreographed by a robot, I doubt we will be able to differentiate it. So that's a question.
But would you take robot dancers?
I would, because that could be fascinating.
Right.
You can program the movements, and I actually did choreograph a bit for big robots in ballet called The Bolt at the Bolshoi by Shostakovich. So we had about 3 or 4 minutes with huge figures moving by themselves. It was beautiful. And ballet and politics or life in the streets, the contemporary dance or contemporary ballet, you can say, definitely reflects what's happening. But in my media, classical ballet, that's a bit more abstract. And we can't really connect with what's going on the streets, but we can reflect the tensions, or ballet is good with simple emotions. We don't have words. We can't go into philosophy. Some people think we can, but I don't. I think the natural impulse of dance, the origins of dance, is just dancing for joy. That's probably the oldest thing that humans did. Some rhythm and movements. So. It expresses something fundamental for the humans, but of today with ballet, I doubt that. We're not so, our tools are not so refined.
Mm-hmm.
Last question for all of you before we open up. What, other than your own work, what's interesting you right now, or what other artists or writers or musicians do you find particularly interesting right now?
I think we've opened a great ability of women to express their emotions. And actually, we've changed the way men write, too, because we've opened up feelings in a new way. And I think that what women artists are going to do in the next 100 years will astonish us.
Alexei?
I've been traveling, and first time in Israel this summer, in Jordan and Cambodia last summer. They're just new worlds, and there is so much in the past that is amazingly interesting and beautiful. So that's my focus right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to answer this. I'm sorry. Coming up.
Fair enough.
I have to say, I agree with Erica that there's and I don't mean this as a kind of virtue signaling. I do think that women, females, have not made art until in large numbers until recently, and that's and really purely, you could say some of it is because of child rearing or whatever, but I think that will change things quite a bit. Is having the society change such that now half the population is even thinking about these, there'll be mediocre female artists, there'll be a few great ones, there'll be a lot of bad ones, but it'll be kind of a great source of new art and a new perspective. But,
that to me is more exciting than artificial intelligence, because it's a whole segment of the population that has not expressed half the human experience.
yeah.
It's fascinating to me. I'm very interested in what women artists did in the past.
It's a little bit like when people talk about space travel. Like, we need to colonize Mars, we need to colonize the moon because we won't survive. And you think, people have a hard time just going to Antarctica,
Right.
like staying alive, a few thousand miles away.
Yep.
And it's a weird metaphor about it, but I think in many ways when people talk about the future of artificial intelligence, half of humanity is a rather untapped resource that way. I didn't expect to make that point, by the way. But,
well, that's great.
But you brought it
But
up.
it's an interesting point, actually.
Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, John, I'm always curious. How much do you use live models in your work?
A great deal more than I ever did now. I've learned how, it's a kind of a technique, actually, meaning or rather a method. I now know when to have the model come in, and also, it took me till I was in my 50s to realize I have to have the model on my left side. The light needs to be coming from the left. I always had, and as soon as I figured that out, it's just like, God, this is easy now. And so if you're right-handed, you need to have the model on the left. But so now pretty much everything, I try to have someone at least stand there so I can look at their skin.
David?
Thank you so much. Just being so aware of where we're sitting, which is an enormous intersection of money and art, which I worked at for 30 years, so disclosure. But I was listening to you all speaking, and I was thinking for fine art, you sort of ultimately have one consumer. For performance, you have audiences. For literature, you have vast audiences of book buyers. I don't mean to reduce the art, but particularly in this age of hyper-wealth and patronage and commodification and monetizing, do you think it's affected each one of your disciplines today in a different way, or the way an artist's career would develop?
Well, with ballet, in order for the ballet company to function, you need money, of course. But there are brilliant companies that operate very little money, and they don't need costumes, and they can perform on a bare stage. So yes, and at the same time, no.
Mm-hmm. The whole question of money and art is a fascinating question. If you're a writer, you have to be prepared to starve, at least some of the time. And it's getting harder and harder to make a living in that field. Many of the artists I know spend 3/4 of their lives raising money for projects, particularly in film and television and in theater. It would be wonderful if they could spend more of their time making art.
Well, if you think about, there's times when lots of money does incredible things. You know, the best films of Hollywood, but if you think about in the 70s, rock music in the 70s, it sort of got more and more produced, more and more expensive to make. And then all of a sudden you have punk rock, which the aesthetic is extreme cheapness in technically, and it turned out to be better. It turned out to be way better than you know, Styx or Boston's third album or whatever. You know, it was, and I think there's a lesson to be learned there. And it's a pendulum, but then there's. You know, your last ballet, this is probably incredibly expensive, and that's where the money is really literally beautiful, and so I think it's not an absolute equation of more money equals less art or starvation equals virtue and therefore better art, but it does operate like a pendulum. And hopefully, if you're, you know, for any individual artist, you hope it's, you know, the lots of money is coinciding with your life.
Right. Yes.
Sasha? So the question is, what is your favorite part about your job?
Oh, God. My favorite part about my job. I think my favorite part is when somebody sends me an email and says, I read your book and it absolutely changed my life. And I hear that a lot from people. And usually there's a resistance. They don't want to read it. And then they read it and something breaks free. And I consider my job to be to inspire people. That's my job, to write things that make people feel freer, that make them feel that their lives, that they can do more with their lives, and that they are inspired to do things. That's the happiest time for me.
You guys want to take a crack, or we'll...
Yeah.
Oh no, please.
Yeah. A couple of things. When I was a dancer, my favorite thing was to do ballet exercises, something that we do every morning, like for an hour and a half, because this language was invented in 16th or 17th century, and it came us through the bodies of all the ballet professionals. So doing these exercises, it's incredible. You really feel the pus going through your body, you know. It's a very special thing. Now, as a choreographer, I love seeing the dancers getting it and getting the steps right and filling it out with their own understanding, imagination, or their own talents. So you see something that you give them become something completely different, beautiful and inspiring.
I would say really there's a point when I'm painting a figure, I often paint it with a kind of dead gray color to get the form. When the color goes on, you put it on transparently at first, and then it comes alive. It doesn't take very long. It takes a couple of hours, but that's always the most exciting and pleasurable. It happened to me yesterday. It was just the most joyous. Sometimes it doesn't work, and then it's a nightmare. But when it works, it's the most pleasure I get almost in life. So.
Yeah.
Hi, for Ms. Jong. I'm a huge fan, and your book did change my life, so thank you for that. Fear of Flying is just such a seminal work of its time, and has such a voice, I think. And obviously things have changed a great deal since then in so many ways. And so I'm wondering, from your point of view, how do you view it over time? How does it look to you from the perspective that you have now, given how mores have changed, sexual mores have changed, and the world has changed? What is your perspective on the book at this point in your life?
Did you mention Fanny? Which novel were you talking
Fear
about?
of Flying.
Fear of Flying.
Fear of Flying. How does it look to me now? I mean, if somebody asks me to read a few lines from it at a reading, I'm amazed at what guts I had. I can't believe that a person as young as I was dared to say all these revolutionary things. I'm kind of amazed. I don't know where it came from.
Would your older self be able to be that daring?
I'm not, I wonder if I could be as fearless as I was then, because I always thought this will never be published. And nobody will ever see it. And now I don't have that innocence and defiance. I hope that I can find it again. But I think I've written some very good things, maybe better things, since Fear of Flying. But that crazy defiance, take that world, that you don't have except in early work.
And as you get older and you get technically probably far better, does that make up for the diminishment of the the lack of embarrassment, the energy, the lack of fear?
I don't know, you have to always have fuck you world. Because I really think so. Because otherwise you become a puppet of the regime. You have to find again that defiance with every book, that voice. Anyway, that's been my experience. And the hardest thing in writing a new book is finding the voice for it. Once you find the voice, you can write it. But until you find the voice, it doesn't exist.
We'll take one more. Yeah.
I'm curious, what do you see as the impact, if any, of identity politics on art and arts? I mean, you spoke about the expanding opportunities for women in the arts, but just as a layperson, I see identity politics playing a greater and greater role in terms of how critics are addressing art and perhaps influencing the choice that artists are making, whether at the choreographer or directorship level, or perhaps even at the artistic level. And I'd just be interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
I personally think it's very damaging, and I find it a negative on many, many, many levels. It even makes me worried about saying that.
Right.
I think it's an illiberal tendency. Let me put it that way.
I actually agree. I think that the works of art that make us most inspired are the ones that show our common humanity. And your humanity is not changed by the color of your skin or the language you speak. The works that we love are the ones that talk about our essence.
But see, that what you just said would just be instantly reduced to privilege, as that rather than a it would be demeaned as just another example of privilege. Anyway, I mean, my answer is that it's very little.
It's very
about it.
limiting, I think. But critics make up critical categories. artists try to show human life. And there'll always be critics who try to limit what is art. And I say the hell with them.
Also, I think, I mean, I'd add, sorry, that identity politics or a sense of is really only a value within an individual. As a, you know, of course, you operate out of your limited point of view, but as a way of looking at the world, at the broad world, I think it's damaging.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, oh, thank you. I mean, I think you guys, we're ending on a note that is going to the heart of a real problem right now that a lot of the political people that we have here are thinking about, which is this sort of tension between free expression and free thought, and then sort of, you know, the thought police. And I will say, though, that, you know, they say that when you look at a time in history with the perspective of history, you know, one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, is the culture, and that's what lives on. So as upsetting as some of the stuff we've been talking about today is, this is actually a very inspiring panel, because if, you know, if this is what our culture is like, and the three of you are representative of that, I think we have reason to be optimistic that we're actually, you know, living through an important and a time that will, you know, the core of it will bring people inspiration and joy. So thank you very much for being here. It was amazing. It was really
Thank you.